Our next guest is Martin Sieff. He asked me how long we were going to spend in the interview today, and I said 20 or 30 minutes. And then I realized that after I read his resume, that there will be no time left for the interview. He has worked for just about every newspaper and news service from around the globe that you could think of. Has had a great career in journalism, and he is also the author of quite a few books titled Politically Incorrect Guide to the Middle East, That Should Still Be Us, How Thomas Friedman's Flat World Myths are Keeping. There's something at the end of that, Martin, that I don't see.
Flatten our backs.
Keeping us flat on our backs. And the great cycles of American history. And that's what we're here to talk about today. He also has Gathering Storm, the Seventh Era of American History. So I've only known Martin a brief time, but I can already tell you he's one smart cookie. Martin, welcome to the truth.
Thank you, John. Takes one, I hope, to know one. You certainly are.
So thank you. You say that history continues to repeat. Is that right? Have I got that right?
Well, yes and no. There are patterns in history. I'm with Mark Twain. Mark Twain says history never repeats itself exactly, but there are themes in history. Twain, being Twain, puts it much better than I ever could, of course. But in cycles of change, I trace 6 eras of American history. And I maintain that each era has a curve to it. They're all very different from each other, but they all start in reaction to huge crises and challenges in America, in society, and in the economy and in national security. And they deal with those societies, those problems amazingly well. But then there's a new orthodoxy of ideas, and after 40 or 50 years, they become out of date. So they can't deal with new challenges that come along. Things get worse, and eventually we have another cyclic crisis. Now, I'm not a Marxist. I despise Marxism, and I'm not a determinist either. But I do list these eras, and I can even very briefly start off by saying what the eras have been so far. First, we had the era of Thomas Jefferson, an era when America was expanding westward across the continent. An era of high ideals, but also of the expansion of slavery. That was the downside of it. But it was run by elitists, by the elitist Southern planters. Then you had the era of popular democracy, an explosion of extraordinary energy, the era of Andrew Jackson from 1828 through to the beginning of the Civil War. And again, an enormous growth in population and technology and prosperity. But also, we enslaved far more people. We took lands from Mexico. Then it led to the crisis of the Civil War, which was the greatest catastrophe so far in our history. Then you have an era of extraordinary growth again, but a totally different America. The era of Abraham Lincoln and General Grant, a very underestimated president. The era of industrial America, when America becomes the greatest industrial society and the most prosperous society, though there are huge extremes of difference between rich and poor, that the world has ever seen. And then after that, you have a kinder, gentler version of the same in the progressive era, which is the era of William McKinley and Theodore Roosevelt, which again is an era of high ideals. And it's an era where there are very sincere and very underestimated today efforts to make society gentler and more tolerant and improve it. And they work to a certain degree. But then you have the great crisis of the Great Depression, which is a huge crisis. And this results in the New Deal under Franklin Roosevelt and our victory in World War II. And what you have from this again is an upscale period and a downscale period. At first, FDR's policies and philosophies seem to sweep all before them, and America becomes very prosperous. there are also negative energies unleashed, and these become clear under Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s. We have collectivism that is out of control. We have the catastrophes of welfareism that destroy both working class white and black and Hispanic community families and social structures and lead to a huge increase in crime. We have an out of control imperialism that at first after World War II is very benign. It saves the world from Nazism. It saves the world from Japanese fascism. It saves the world, protects the world from the huge evils of communism, which threaten everybody. But then we bungle it in Vietnam. Things get sour. And we have a new period of crisis in the late 60s and 70s, and President Reagan rescues us from that. And under President Reagan and the first President Bush, and to some degree under President Clinton too, we sweep all before us again. It's a great era of triumphalism in American history. Everything seems to be going very well. But then it goes sour over the past 20 years. We don't protect our industry. We don't protect our society. We have open borders far too much. We have the destruction of industrial America, which is the source of our prosperity throughout our history. We have a denial of policies of tariffs. And I'm a great supporter of President Trump. And I very much support President Trump's MAGA agenda. And I would maintain that in the face of all the propaganda thrown against him, the real reason the president is hated is not because he's an unscrupulous demagogue with no principles and no consistency, but it's precisely the opposite, that he has been consistent to his principles and his goals in both his first and second administrations. And this is why his enemies hate him so much. Not because the MAGA agenda is false, but because it is real and because he is achieving it.
Well, it seems to me on that subject that the Democrats are against anything that Trump is for, even if it's in Americans' best
interest. Yes, I agree.
And to me, that is just the epitome of selfishness. They seem motivated by their own political power and lust for the same.
I agree completely.
So there is an awful lot to unpack in what you said. Let's focus right now on the elitist. Richard Nixon complained about the elitist, the Northeasterners, the establishment who thought they were the smartest people in the room, and they were a thorn in his side. And I think today we're watching the elitist as they gather in Davos, Switzerland, as we speak. Do you worry about those global elitists that are in Davos? A lot of people seem to.
Yes, completely. And I know it very well because when I was with the Washington, you mentioned I worked, if not for everybody, at least for some major outfits.
Obviously, you couldn't keep a job. You worked for the Washington Times, the UPI.
Well, for 13 years, I kept a job, and then I moved elsewhere, and I was with a tech.
Well, now I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but you've just had a wonderful career in journalism, and you've been nominated for 3 Pulitzer Prizes. That's a lot more I can boast of, I'll tell you.
Well, I have friends who've won it or been up for more, so one should know one's place. But you bring up Davos,
yes,
and the Washington Times and UPI, United Press International, who I went to after them, both sent me to Davos. So I covered the Davos meetings over several years. I loved doing it. The only problem was it often clashed with the Super Bowl. So in those years, I was watching the Super Bowl at parties, which was great. But it was in hotels or American gatherings at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I still had to be up to cover other things at 7 the next day. Of course, I was a bit younger then, so it was easier.
Right.
But Davos was great because it's a skiing resort. It's quite small. It's not easy to get to, which of course adds to the security aspect. And in the media, of course, we weren't privy to what was really going on, but we were there, and there was lots of free food, and there was even better, there was lots of free drink. So everybody had a great time, and you could ski a bit too, provided you weren't too pie-eyed while you were doing it, while you were going down the slopes. So I loved covering Davos. But the sense you had there was exactly what you said. It wasn't No doubt there are millions of secret deals being reached, but to me, the revealing thing was what I could see with my own eyes, which was people had these very simplistic views of the world. No borders. Free trade is wonderful. You mustn't protect your own trade anywhere. You must always sacrifice your own people and your own industry interests. It's much more important to have good strategic relations with China or South Korea or any country in Europe rather than protect the standard of living and welfare and hopes of 300 million Americans at home who do not go to Davos. This doesn't matter. You can serve up all these people because free trade is always going to raise everybody's standard of living. Now it's not. I have 2 degrees in history, modern history, which means over the past 500 years from the University of Oxford in Britain, at a time when it was still a great university. Hopefully it still is, I think. But I can stand on one foot and in 5 minutes demolish all of Thomas Friedman's theories of free trade. They're all lies. They are not based on fact. Every society in history that has become dominant and prosperous, us, the Chinese today, the British before us, France from the 16th to the 19th centuries have always been based not on free trade, but on the opposite of free trade. The rise of Germany from being a joke for hundreds of years to being the most powerful and successful industrial nation in Europe in the 19th century was based on the Zollverein, the German customs union. The rise of industrial America comes from the 2 great tariff laws of 1862 and 1864 that President Abraham Lincoln pushes through. And the demolition, the destruction of American industry and of American prosperity and of the American working class and of the American middle class now all comes as a direct result of free trade starting from the Kennedy round, which is misnamed. It was actually pushed through by both Lyndon Johnson and Nixon. President Kennedy theoretically signed onto it, but made none of the catastrophic concessions that followed. And the worst decision of all, of course, was Bill Clinton's decision to let China join the World Trade Organization, which wasn't even wrong in itself, but he refused to protect American domestic industries. I do not demonize China, nor does President Trump. The Chinese rightly and morally look after the interests of their own people, 1.3 billion people, and their standard of living. It was President George W. Bush and Barack Obama very much, and most of all Joe Biden, and of course the genius Bill Clinton himself. They were the people who sold the pass because they were ignorant of economics.
Well, you really so a couple of things. One, Bob Lighthizer, who was in Trump 1.0 and worked for the Commerce Department under Wilbur Ross, just penned a book not too long ago called "No Trade is Free."
He's right.
And he is a free market believer, but he just said that, on the subject of tariffs, if we're not at parity with tariffs, and somebody's got their hand in our wallet, and that's just fundamentally wrong. And on China, Richard Nixon really opened the door to China, extending an invitation to our markets and allowing us to enter their markets. And it sounded, and I thought it was a really good thing then, and I still think it's probably a good thing now,
yes.
Except they have taken full advantage. Too much of our pharmaceuticals are made in China. Too many of our computer chips are made in China, and they're not satisfied with that. So now they want to move on Taiwan, where 90% of our computer chips are actually manufactured. And they float spy balloons over our country. They flooded us with fentanyl. I ran for office in Georgia in 2022. Yeah, 2022. And there wasn't a campaign stop that I made that someone didn't come up to me and say that they had lost a friend, son or daughter or loved one to fentanyl. And so someone, when I was talking about spy balloons, said, well, you don't think we're doing that to them? And I'm like, well, let's put that aside. I know we all spy on each other. They spy on us, we spy on them.
Sure.
No question. But the fact that Biden permitted it, that's where my objection was, number one. And number two, I think fentanyl is not the same as a spy balloon. They were seemingly trying to weaken America and really impact us in a very negative way. And I highly resent that. That's not strong enough verbiage, frankly.
Yes, I fully agree. A central in any human system, and this is central to the problem of AIDS, of course, is the human immune system and the breakdown of the human immune system. Countries, nations, societies are like this too. We have to have immune systems, and we have to have protection against being weakened and being infected. Uh, a key part of this is having strong border controls. We had the most massive peaceful human migration in human history populated the United States from after the Civil War through to the 1920s. And we had scores of millions of people coming in. But there were also very strong controls on this. Now, they couldn't be foolproof. Organized crime came in, not just with the Italian people, but with every single group. It came in with the Irish when we came in the 1840s. Uh, there were Jewish prostitution gangs, basically based in both Central Europe and Buenos Aires, but also got footholds in New York in the 1880s as well. Basically, every group that comes, there will be negative elements, but overwhelmingly, the impact of mass immigration is usually, and certainly in our history, enormously beneficial. But you've got to regulate it, and it's got to be legal, and you've got to control it. President Trump has always been clear about this. He's never opposed immigration into the United States. He wants for the federal government to retain control of immigration that liberals and Democrats have deliberately scrapped since the Edward Kennedy's catastrophic opening of the floodgates back in the 1960s. And you have to have legal immigration. You have to have law abiding control of immigration. What's the result been? It's been that the Mexican cartels, which are an even bigger threat to the people of Mexico than they are to the people of the United States, have become one of the, not just the most powerful criminal elements on the planet, they've become major world powers, more powerful than most European governments. Arguably, only France and, at least until recently, Britain had viable national governments, which of course are now being undermined under the one world system and under the EU system as well. So things are getting worse and worse.
They've had a huge problem of immigration too.
Yes,
It
exactly.
feels almost coordinated and intentional. If you
Yes,
zoom out and look at the globe, you can see the same patterns playing out. So it makes you wonder who's behind it and what is going on. But if you look just at the United States and the Biden administration, and the Democrats going back to Clinton talked about our southern border and how it needed to be dealt with. And so Trump comes and deals with it. And then the Democrats decide it's such a bad idea. Uh,
exactly.
then you look at the Roosevelt Hotel in New York, which is just one example where immigrants were housed, clothed, fed, given an Obama phone, a daily stipend, and a motor scooter to tour around New York City on. My God, have we lost our minds? And so it's not about benevolence. It's not about charity. It's about power. And the Democrats have engaged in this operation, in my view, to allow immigrants to come into the country, irrespective of whether they are bad people, whether they've committed felonies in their own countries. President Trump says that they've released their mental institutions and their jails and sent those
He's
people to the
correct.
United States. And it's demonic to think that somebody could be so selfish and so unconcerned about the future of our country and only singularly concerned about their power that they would allow this condition to have occurred. And President Trump has stopped it with, I might hasten to add, no new laws passed by Congress.
Exactly.
It's,
If I may,
yes, please.
I agree with you 100%, John. All the way. Right on, man.
So now we've got Somalis in Minnesota.
Indeed, we do.
The fraud is estimated at between 10 and 30 billion dollars, and they were wiring the money back to Somalia. the federal treasury got wind of it and shut that down. So now they're carrying the money out in suitcases by $1 million at a time. The only problem is they don't have enough suitcases, enough couriers to take it all back. I mean, it is one of the most egregious things I've ever seen in my 72 and a half years on this earth.
I completely agree with you all the way. And I'm of the same generation as you are. I even
God love
have
you.
an aching. I look a lot older. I think
No,
I'm only
au
a couple of
contraire.
years. But I agree with you completely. And for me, there's an extra twist to this because when I came to America 45 years ago, and it was the Reagan era, it was a joy for me to come. It wasn't that our country was perfect. No country is ever perfect. But Mrs. Thatcher was heroically rolling back 40 years of out of control socialism and liberal permissiveness in Britain at the time. Nobody in America today realizes, most people in Britain don't realize, how bad things became in Britain in the 1970s before Mrs. Thatcher took over. You had 25% yearly inflation that was projected to reach 50% inflation within 2 years. You had the routine assassination, usually in bombings, but also in shootings, of prominent conservative national leaders in the country. You had the collapse of industries that had been the wonder of the world for 200 years, and there seemed to be no end in sight to the spiral. And it wasn't easier for her to turn things around, but she did. And of course, she couldn't succeed all the way. Nobody ever does. But of course, the forces that caused this, the ideas that caused this, and the educational system that kept churning out people who swallowed the most disastrous anti-industrial and anti-national and anti-patriotic policies became worse than ever. And so things are going down the tube again. And they have one of the worst and incompetent and disastrous governments in their history today.
Well, and couple that with the EU, and I think you could apply the same statements to them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
I just don't know. President Trump was in Davos earlier this week, and he was very combative with the people that were in attendance there and very accusatory of the EU for allowing open borders. And, the thing that um, just baffles my mind, Trump calls it, what does he call it? The green new scam or something like that. And, I've been watching news reports from Davos. They're still pushing this climate agenda,
Yes.
even though Bill Gates has said that emphasis on that is misguided. What is the deal with climate change, and why are these people fanatical about it when we have demonstrated scientifically that we're probably not? Well, they even acknowledge that it's not global warming because they dropped the nomenclature and turned it into climate change. And there are people there openly and consciously discussing causing climate change by leaving these contrails and making artificial rain and all sorts of stuff like that in an attempt to cool the earth, they say. Well, I just think I'm an innovator. I'm an early adapter. I love technology. I actually relish change when it's to help enhance our quality of life. But I think when it transcends into playing God, that you're on very dangerous ground, number one. And number two, the allocation of resources is just absurd when you consider the things that they could be doing with that money, especially in the EU. And Donald Trump said it's not going to happen in the United States. We're just not going to sign up to it. And I so applaud him for that.
Again, I couldn't agree with you more. And the Irish, we are, of course, very charming, but also very pushy. Have me back for a show just on this, because your difficulty will be getting me to stop. I agree with you 100%. The demand on global warming is not scientific. Even if global warming happens, and there are times it does and there are times it doesn't, but it is not caused, none of it is caused by human greenhouse gases. There is absolutely no hard evidence for this whatsoever. None, zero.
Yet 90% of the scientists in the world were signing on to it.
Because they are real scientists, because they're mass produced they're mass produced liberals who are narrow technicians in their own field. One can talk about this for many hours. There are ice caps on Mars that are never discussed, and they have been shrinking to some degree, and then they grow somewhat again. But the point is, climate change happens on Mars, both positively and negatively, getting hot, getting colder at different times. How can that be? If the climate is constant everywhere, if the sun is constant everywhere, how can that be if it's all caused by us evil human beings in our industry? No, the whole climate change myth is a religious fanaticism. It is not a scientific fanaticism. And we know from the Middle Ages and all of human history that irrational fanaticism, just look at Nazism, just look at communism, just look at Islamic fundamentalism. The terror of an out of control world is one of these. Carl Sagan, the great false prophet of climate change, who had previously championed the opposite. He said the great danger was world cooling from if we had nuclear war, which might happen if, God forbid, there was nuclear war. But then he goes 180 degrees around and he says, no, we're going to become a hellhole world like Venus. And there's no... everything his theory came, he was a fake scientist and a lousy one. And the media loved him because his idea of a runaway greenhouse effect is contrary to the second law of thermodynamics, one of the most fundamental laws of physics. It's also contrary to what real science needs to be based on evidence, on documented evidence. Their evidence is all repeatedly faked and has been exposed to have been so, as you know so well. But what has it produced? Because they brainwash the young through the Frankfurt School of Cultural Marxism, we have all of Western Europe, all of America and Canada, all of the West. Generations of children are brought up to regard industry as evil. It's another enormous lie. I like to watch classic TV shows like Murder, She Wrote from the 1980s. Even back then, you find even Hollywood is pushing out the idea of noble, per-native noble peoples, the Native American peoples of American Canada and the Eskimos, want to defend the per-polar bears. They want to defend the per-flying thrushes. It's all the evil oil companies and energy companies coming in that are destroying the environment. Steven Seagal even made movies about this. So did Michael Caine. Thriller movies, popular, successful movies. But the truth is the opposite. If you go up to Canada, if you go up to travel widely in Alaska, as I have done, you find people are the opposite. The native peoples across our hemisphere and across the world want investment. They want oil companies to come in. They want energy companies to come in. If they can't get, they prefer American ones. If they can't get American ones, they'll settle for Chinese ones. But they would like to have American ones because it raises the standard of living. It feeds their children. It prevents their children starving. It builds them hospitals. It builds them homes. It builds them schools. And polar bears they regard as a menace that eat people. And they are right. This romanticization of nature comes from people who have never been in nature, people who live in nature, whether it is real frontiersmen across all of traditional America, the American heartland, or you are down in Florida, or across Canada, or up in Alaska. All of these people look for internal free markets. They look for industry. They look for rising levels of prosperity. By contrast, look at Britain. Britain is now a deindustrialized nation as it has not been in at least 400 years. There are there are only a handful of oil refineries left operating in Britain. There are no steel mills. There are no steel refinery works left in Britain. Where the Industrial Revolution began, the Greens have done something that the US Army, Air Force, and Bomber Command could not do in World War II. that the Soviets failed to do in the Cold War, that the British Empire failed to do in World War One. They have deindustrialized Germany. The German people are in the same state as the British people are because of this madness that is driving everybody to destitution and ruin.
We're talking to Martin Sieff, a journalist, author, and three-time Pulitzer Prize nominee. Martin, I said let's zoom out 30,000 feet. Now I want to zoom out 30,000 miles, if you will. And,
Wow.
your speciality is to look at cycles and cycles that repeat with Mark Twain's qualification. I have been watching and reading people like Ray Dalio and this YouTuber who are studying economic cycles, but they're on a very
Yes.
macro level. And both of these people have traced great empires of our time, like the Roman Empire and the Spanish Empire, the Danish Empire, the British Empire, and now today you might say the American Empire. And they all followed the same life
Yes.
cycle. They represented innovation, freedom, and most importantly a reserve currency, while another empire was in decline. And there are four stages of development for these empires. The first phase being the build up, the second phase being the good old days, the golden ages of those countries.
Yeah.
And then the third is a challenger, another country that is doing it better and faster and with a safer currency. And then the smart money starts to leave. And before you know it, the empire is in decline. What phase of that cycle do you see America right today?
We're see in the terminal phase, but there is hope because we are in one of the cyclic crises that I predict in my book. And there's another long range economic theorist who died 90 years ago. Nobody knows about him in America, though he's in history. He was a Russian economist called Nikolai Kondratiev. And he traced exactly the same crisis that the great scholars you have just mentioned have traced more recently as well. He was one of the great pioneers in this. And he traced 50 to 55-year economic cycles. And he said in a free market society, levels of speculation will get so out of control after 50 or 60 years, and levels of debt, that there will be a crisis and a crash. And therefore, at first, the communists the Marxists loved him. But then the second shoe dropped because Kondratiev said this does not mean capitalism is doomed. It means, on the contrary, capitalism renews itself every 50 years. You have to have period. Andrew Mellon, a very much abused Secretary of the Treasury under three US presidents in the 1920s, advised Herbert Hoover in the late 1920s that the way to deal with the Great Depression was to let prices and stocks and wages at first collapse and fall, and don't try and bail out companies that are going bankrupt. Let them go bankrupt, and the resources that are liberated and will then be turned into new, more positive directions. And because at first people are willing to work for much lower prices, there will be new companies starting, and they will be more efficient, more enterprising companies. They will react against all the mistakes of the immediate past generation. And you have a new era of growth starting. And in fact, we had this earlier in the most successful recovery in American history to this day from any serious economic crisis. And liberal economists and Marxists never discuss it. It is the recovery of 1921 onwards from the great catastrophe of 1920 under Woodrow Wilson. And the recovery was held by Secretary of the Treasury Andrew Mellon and by one of the most underestimated, despised, and admirable presidents in our history, Warren Harding. And it's a completely unknown story. But by contrast, Herbert Hoover made an even bigger mistake than Franklin Roosevelt. He was an even bigger collectivist than Roosevelt. He froze wages and prices to keep them in place during the Great Depression. And instead of protecting standards of living, this meant that there couldn't be a full crash and a super rapid recovery as we had in 1921. He defied the free market. He claimed to be defending it, but it was a lie. Hoover was an engineer. He was a top-down statist. He was all in favor of this in the 1920s. He hated the free market. He hated free enterprise. He hated open competition. He hated Wall Street at its creative best. And that's why we had the catastrophe of the 1920s, and it continued under Franklin Roosevelt, and we didn't reach 1929 levels of prosperity in market terms until 1954. But the free market works. Mrs. Thatcher deregulated the City of London in 1986 in ways that it had not been free to do since 1931. And the result was a tremendous resurgence in the short term of Britain's prosperity, economic wealth. And all of a sudden, Britain was a huge magnet for overseas investment of industry from the United States, from Japan, from China, from Taiwan. Far from hollowing out British industry, they were rebuilding it in the 1980s and 1990s because of Mrs. Thatcher's free market policies.
Well, on that in that same vein, I think that President Trump is rebuilding our country's economy in real time, right before our very eyes. He's talking about the potential of eliminating the income tax, which I think would celebrate him as the greatest president of all time in our country, and replacing it with tariffs, basing it on trade. And he is hoping, I think, and working, his strategy is to raise the tide so that all ships improve.
Exactly.
And I think that we have got to insist on budget discipline, because
right
now our spending is irrational, it's out of control, and 10% of it goes to fraud. If we could just eliminate the fraud, waste, and abuse, we would balance the budget. How simple can you be? But Ilhan Omar and the Democrats, oh no, you're sexist, racist, homophobes, isolationist. I mean, every ist that you can come up with. And I think it's simply because of one thing. They're in on it. They don't want the spigot to be shut off.
Exactly. President Trump in his 2016 campaign was campaigning in working class, post-industrial, deindustrialized downtown Detroit, overwhelmingly ethnic African-American community. And he gave I covered that speech, and he gave a heartbreaking speech. He appealed to the people of Detroit, and they listened to him. He said, give me a chance. If it doesn't work, go back to the Democrats. But look at what the Democrats' policies, look at what these collectivist socialist policies have brought you over the past 50 years. How can it be worse? Now, in the 2016 election, President Trump won a greater majority of the African-American vote and the Hispanic-American vote than any other Republican in modern times. And in 2020, after 4 years of his policies, his percentage of the votes from those communities were much higher. And in 2024, they were higher yet. And this was a key reason why the defeat of Kamala Harris by such wide margins in 2024 took the liberal establishments in both Europe and most of all in America itself on the eastern and western seaboards so much by surprise. They assumed that the African American community and the Hispanic American community would stay down on the plantation. They would simply say, yes, massa, we let you elitists plunge us into more deindustrializing, green reformist, idealistic nonsense and ruinous socialism, and waste and steal all our money. So all our efforts are for nothing, and more of our children will die of fentanyl than ever before. And you expect us still to tug our hairs and say, yes, massa, thank you so much. And increasing numbers of people in the African American and Hispanic communities rejected this. They saw what worked and they saw what didn't work.
Well, Lyndon Baines Johnson ushered in the Great New Deal and not the New
Ha!
Deal, the Great Society.
Yes.
And in the course of doing so, made the statement that's been repeated many, many times that after that, black people would never vote for a Republican ever again. Although he did not use the word black people. And he was almost right. But I think the miscalculation was that along with the Great Society, he also desegregated schools and gave black people an equal opportunity for education. And what
Yes.
we're seeing is that as blacks become better educated and more knowledgeable about the ways of the world, their eyes are open and they have begun to think for themselves. And they're no longer relegated to just thinking based on what someone tells them to do. And that has been the Democrat strategy for 60 years. And I think they're at the end of that leash now. Do you agree? Am I being too controversial in making those statements?
Well, if you are, you're not alone. I agree with you 100%. I think that's a brilliant and incisive and extremely important analysis. I agree with you, man, all the way.
Well, I think we just got to keep spreading the word. One last thing, I heard you talk about George, was it Herbert Walker Bush? I think. Um, and I think it was probably during his presidency that we had Rodney King somewhere back along there. And
Oh, I remember that.
he
Yes.
said, can't we all just get along? And it seems so simplistic. But to me, there's something so real about the aspiration. And I just wonder, I look at you, you're an Irishman. You live in New Jersey. I live in Florida. I'm my ancestors are from Scotland and England. And we agree on so much, even though our backgrounds are very different. I just wonder, and I love Trump, but I don't think he is much of what's the right word? He does not bring people together.
Yeah.
I and George Bush, the only thing I really heard him say that I liked was we needed a kinder, gentler nation. And I'm just wondering if you and I and people that we could influence could not begin a conversation in America today and start it out with the simple phrase, on what do we agree?
I like that. Yes.
Would that not bring us together in the end? Because I got to tell you, we all got two eyeballs and two ears and two legs, two arms, hands, and a brain. And we've got so much in common and so much to rally around. But we just seem to focus on our differences and the things that we don't necessarily agree on. And then when you put it all on a ledger, you have all the things we agree on, the few things we disagree on. They're really kind of trivial.
Yes.
Are they not?
Yes. You know, I hear you say this and I hear the way you say it. And I'm so old. Well, actually, you're almost as old as I am. You'll remember this too. I hear President Reagan speaking through you, and the best of President Kennedy for that matter. And there are times like the Oklahoma bombing, a terrible business, or 9/11, or in times of great national disaster, when such heartbreaking things happen. And as you say, this is exactly what happens. People from all across society come together. I had a friend, obviously I won't identify him by name, there's no need, but a very conservative fellow from the Midwest who always had a cultural, virtual hatred of New York City. And then he saw the way New Yorkers rallied
Mm-hmm.
so heroically after the horrific bombings of 9/11. And he said he cried for the people of New York. And he was frustrated that he wasn't in a position to go just as a volunteer and go out there and help himself. And you're absolutely right. That's exactly the kind of common humanity that brings us so together.
Well, you're very kind, Martin. You're an inspirational figure, and thank you for the nice, undeserved compliment. But I do
No, it's a very
appreciate it.
deserved compliment. Thank
Well,
you.
I think we should maybe try and start a movement. And I think it could become organic and it could go viral because I think there is a yearning deep inside of each one of us to love each other and to get along. And
Yes.
it's the damn leaders, I'm convinced, that divide us. And they're doing it again out of political greed for power because that is how they maintain their base. And I want the base to stop. I think the parties have outgrown their usefulness. Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, black, white, straight, gay, all this noise just needs to go out the window. And we just need to make America the focus. We are all Americans. And I'm sorry, Elon Omar, that's your invitation to leave.
Exactly. Look, I'm a combative Irishman, and I'm much more at home, in the bang everybody in the head. In cycles of change, I trace the central role of the Irish in the dynamics of domestic American politics, especially in the big city machines from after the Civil War onwards. Right. And we just had a gift for it and we had a passion for it. But also, of course, we like a good argument, especially over a drink or three,
I was just about to get to that point. As an Irishman, I bet you'll drink a pint with your fellow man.
It is not inconceivable.
We'll get on down here and let's
All
have
the
a
way,
pint
man.
together.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Martin Sieff. And that is The Truth. I'm John Gordon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much.
Stay tuned. We've got another compelling interview right coming up.